Hi guys, here we are with another question from Leetcode. This one is number 55, jump game, and here is the problem. You are given an integer array nums. You are initially positioned at the array's first index, and each element in the array represents your maximum jump length at that position. Return true if you can reach the last index or false otherwise. So this question wants you to reach the last index using the jumps that the numbers in each index provide. So let's take an example array. We need to reach the last index, which is index 4, by taking jumps from the first index. Okay, let's take this one. Here we're on index 0, and we can make 3 jumps here. So we can go 1, 2, 3. So 0 plus 3 brings us here on index 3. In index 3 we have number 1. Here we can make 1 jump, so 3 plus 1 takes us to the last index. This array has an answer. But what's the solution? The solution is that we have to start from the end. We say that this is our goal index. This is our fine index. So if there is an index before this index, before number 4, there is another index that can take us here, that would be a good index too. So let's say this is our fine index. Can index 3 bring us to a fine index? So 3 can jump 1 squares. So 3 plus 1 can bring us here. So 3 also is a fine square. But are there any other values that can bring us to a fine square? Any value that can bring us to a fine square is a fine square itself. Number 2, let's take number 2. Number 2 can bring us here because 2 plus 1 makes 3. So it can bring us to a fine square. So it is a fine square. What about the previous one? The previous one is index 1. Index 1 plus 2, because you can make 2 jumps from this square, it can bring us to a fine square. It can bring us to square number 3. So it can bring us to a safe or fine area. So number 2 is also fine. And what about the first index, which is index 0? It can definitely bring us to a fine square. So that is fine too. So the final condition in the program would be if the first index is a fine index, we have an answer. Let's take another example. We know that the last square is the fine one. We need to be here. But is there an index that can bring us here from the first index? Let's take the indexes one by one. Index 3. How many jumps can we take from index 3? 0 jumps. So index 3 cannot bring us to index 4. So this is not a fine square. Index 2 has the value 1. So you can make only 1 jump from this index. So it can bring us to a square which is not fine. So index 2 is not fine itself. And index 1 can bring us to the index 3 because it carries value 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Index 3 is not a fine index. So index 1 is not a fine index either. And this one, index 0, can bring us to index 3 because 0 plus 3 makes 3. So index 0 is not a fine index either. So if index 0 is not a fine index, we don't have an answer. There is no way from index 0 to the last index. So this one should return false. Okay, we are back on Leetcode. On Leetcode, I have written the code in C#, and here are the lines. You see that it is not a very long program. We say that we need to know the end of the array, and I use final. Well, I didn't have to set a variable here. I could have used this expression, nums.length -1, and we set a variable for good index. We need to know which index is our good index, and we know that the final index is our goal, and we want it to be our good index. So we set the final index, which is the length of the array -1, the good index. Now we start from the end, so we set I to the last index, final -1. Actually, this is not the last index, this is 1 to the last index. And we go through the loop as long as I is greater than equal to 0, and we diminish I each time. Now, if we need to know if there is a way from the current index, from index I, to a fine or good index, we want to mark index I as a good index. So if I, which is the index, plus the value that I carries, is greater than our good index, so I is a good index itself. Okay? So we set the next good index to I. The first one is the last value in the last index of the array. Let's say the last index is 4. So our good index is 4, and for the first time I is 3. Can index 3 take us to index 4? If it can, so our next good index is number 3. And we do that for the rest of the array to the beginning. Now, if our good index equals 0, so that means we reached the first index of the array and we set that to a good index. We return true, so there is an answer. If our last good index is not 0, it's a number greater than 0, so we return false. Thank you for listening to me, and please don't forget to subscribe and like my video if you got your answer. Thank you.